Namaskar from Deshsanchar's Diplomatic Eye. I am Mitra Bandhu Paudel. Welcome to the new episode. I will be presenting detailed analysis on non-aligned movement, its challenges and experts' opinion. This program's objective is to present an analytical point of view on the topic related to diplomacy, foreign affairs and international relations. Before dissecting the main topic of today's program, let me present you some important global developments. Mainly three major developments will be shared. The first one is following nearly complete abolition of the votes, anti-Islamic populist politician Geert Wilders has emerged victorious in the Netherlands election. Mr. Wilders wants to call the Netherlands exit from European Union. That referendum to exit from the EU, although he acknowledges there is not national sentiment in favor of it. Amsterdam-based professor and management expert Luc Hofstegen told this analyst that Mr. Wilders is considered a far-right politician who for 2 decades has been highly critical on issues like immigration and particularly Islam. He has been flirting with the extreme far-right European politician like Madame Le Pen. He won't have an easy time forming or leading the Dutch government because several big parties find it impossible to cooperate with Mr. Wilders, as quoted by Professor Hofstegen. The second important issue is about China's warning to the United States and the Philippines. China issued a warning to the United States and the Philippines on November 22, 2023, stating that their recent joint naval patrols near Chinese territorial waters should not jeopardize China's sovereignty and maritime interest. According to analysts, as quoted by the Global Times, Washington and Manila's military actions demonstrate their lack of sincerity in attempting to diffuse tension. The third one is about the Israel's Hamas truce. Israel accepted Hamas offer to take hostages. According to CNN, Qatar declared on November 23 that a truce between Israel and Hamas would start at 7 a.m. local time, midnight ET on Friday, the 24th November, and that civilian hostages would be released at 4 p.m. local time. We hope for safe return of missing Bipin Joshi, who was abducted by Hamas militants from Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin the 13th episode of the Diplomatic Eye entitled Nepal and the Non-Aligned Movement, Navigating the Challenges of Future Relevance. The non-aligned movement NAM emerged following World War II and advocated for emerging countries to avoid forming alliances with the US and the then USSR. The movement's objective was to advance national self-determination in opposition to colonialism and imperialism. It was founded in 1961 during the Belgrade Conference and was led by prominent figures including Joseph Broz Tito, Jamal Abdul Nasir, Kwame Nkrumah, Jawaharlal Nehru and Sukarno. There are 120 countries that make up the NAM. It is the largest state organization in the world, second only to the United Nations. In spite of its support for international cooperation, multilateralism and national sovereignty, the non-aligned movement has grown more critical of global economic inequalities in the post-Cold War era. 1961, King Mahendra made his first trip to attend the first non-aligned summit held in Belgrade. In the current context, does non-aligned movement NAM have any significance? Why is that so? I have asked a number of eminent academics journalists, writers, columnists, diplomats, and military personnel this issue. With the exception of 9 replies, columnist and management expert Dr. Narayan Manandar does not think that NAM is significant in present context. He says it is an outdated concept. He believes that the idea of a yam between two rocks is no longer relevant. Nations like China, India, Nepal, the US, and the EU have all made substantial efforts to align themselves. He believes that Nepal's foreign policy has changed over time, going from being isolationist to being pro-Indian. Further, historical events, geographical location, and a weak economy have all had an impact on Nepal's foreign policy, according to Dr. Manandar. His view is somewhat similar with the view of conflict analyst Kitha Ponkalan 2016, who asserted that the significance and relevance of the non-aligned movement NAM have diminished with the end of the Cold War. A permanent unipolar New World Order was seen by many as the direction in which the international system was heading. Despite the fact that the situation how NAM was originated some 62 years have changed, writer and columnist Devraj Dahal believes that for global politics the relevance of non-alignment may rise or decline, but for Nepal, located between two powers, will remain as its normative principles help Nepal to judge events, enable to fight for justice and project independent identity. It also helps Nepal to escape from geopolitical determinism and seek space for independent maneuver. The significance of the non-aligned movement in international relations, according to a senior Nepal army officer, depends on its geopolitical situation and national interest. Nepal, an independent state, faces challenges due to its geographical proximity to two major states with a different political orientation. He adds that you are either with us or against us is the greatest threat, so state has to take decisions independently. Neutrality and non-alignment is not the same thing, according to Dr. Dinesh Bhattrai, the former permanent representative of Nepal to the United Nations. The issue should be examined impartially and assessed according to its merit and drawbacks. Dr. Bhattrai further states that the main argument put up by NAM is how important it is to evaluate each issue separately and in the context of their nation's interest. The ability to pursue an independent foreign policy is a necessary component of this freedom of choice, allowing member nations to act autonomously and in line with their own national interest. Non-alignment is not neutral, nor does it imply silence, as quoted by him. Dr. Bhattrai, however, warns that Nepal is tightrope walking because of its strategic location, which makes it at risk. Some experts suggest that concept of NAM that needs to be revised. The NAM or institutional framework is still in place, however, it must be reshaped and re-engineered. That was the quotation of Kitha Ponkalan. Similar opinions are expressed by former ambassador to Brazil, Pradumna Bikram Saha, who believes that in the context of bilateral, regional and global relations, NAM needs to be redefined. Mr. Saha, however, states that with the exception of the military and security aspects, NAM should be expanded. In terms of commercial connectivity and economics, nations are linked. Ambassador Saha further adds that we in Nepal cannot refuse the assistance of the non-member nations of the NAM. However, we must use caution at the same time. Some domestic opponents of Nepal's actions claim that the country cannot maintain its neutrality in all situations and that Nepal's action in some circumstances do not align with the NAM values. A senior army officer who refused to quote name says that NAM is not neutrality. It is the concept of taking the right decisions in contemporary political circumstances. Nepal must define a different political thought to secure its sovereignty and independence, advocating for a strong UN and a stronger NAM for a better future. In the meantime, as the nation is governed by its constitution, which states unequivocally that non-alignment is the foundation of Nepal's independent foreign policy, the former ambassador of Nepal to France and president of the Center for Diplomacy and Development CDD, Mohan Krishna Shrestha, believes that Nepal has not abandoned the principle of non-alignment. Ambassador Shrestha continues by saying that as it is a platform for raising concerns, the voice of 120 non-aligned nations are important in expressing their sovereignty. While explaining the policies of state in Part 4, Article 51M1 of Nepal's constitution, it is clearly stated that to conduct an independent foreign policy based on the Charter of the United Nations, non-alignment principles of Panchashil, international law and the norms of world peace, taking into consideration of the overall interest of the nation while remaining active in safeguarding the sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence and national interest of Nepal. Now let us talk about Indian context. Karnataka-based journalist and writer Sangamesh Sinakai told this analyst that Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of independent India, had said in 1946 that India proposes as far as possible to keep away from the power politics of groups aligned against one another, which have led in the past to world wars and which may again lead to disasters on an even vaster scale. Though NAM began as a policy of non-participation in the military affairs of a bipolar war in India, now countrymen are in dilemma over future of India in the context of NAM. Reason for a dilemma, according to Sangamesh, is a recent statement of India's External Affairs Minister S. Deshsanchar's statement that says, I quote, NAM was a term of a particular era and a particular geopolitical landscape. Deshsanchar's verb was, as quoted by Sangamesh, has created whether NAM will become thing of the past or India will continue with NAM in coming years. Now let us talk about Nepal's commitment to non-aligned movement, contradictions between principles and practices. Writer Devraj Dahal argues that Nepal principally holds non-alignment principles, but practically Nepali leaders' attributional affinity of democracy, human rights, education, law, economy and exposure are tilted toward those who support them to come to power. This has created contradictions between national imperatives for non-alignment, independence and progress, and regime imperatives for survival in power and compulsion to deviate from non-alignment, according to him. Major General retired Nepal Bhushan Chand debates that bringing together weaker nations to create synergy is an excellent way to start committing to Panchashil ideology-based values and voices. Given the current, more complex environmental situation, it appears that deeper national alignment is necessary to confront tragedies and atrocities caused by both nature and man. Professor Ramkumar Pandey, who is also the president of International PEN Nepal chapter, firmly believes that due to its important location and contributions to international politics, culture and to civilizations, Nepal, an independent country, faces challenges from both external pressures and internal political weaknesses. Nepal's internal politics is still weak despite its geographic homogeneity, and warfare is something sparked by outside disturbances. Professor Pandey reveals that since Nepal has had an unstable progress over the years, King Mahendra suggested non-alignment in order to maintain a balance in foreign policy. To serve their own agendas, political parties, however, have distorted foreign policy. Professor Pandey strongly suggests that prosperity, peace and progress ought to be the top priorities in politics, and Nepal must set up a zone of peace and prioritize non-alignment. Dr. Manandar has a different view. He claims that in a multipolar world, it is challenging to be non-aligned since one must support national interest and be sensitive to geopolitical forces. The formation of regional geopolitical and economic alliances such as the BRICS, Quad, Asia Pacific and BRI as stated by Dr. Manandar requires smaller nations to stay true to their own interest and preserve their place in a multipolar world. Yuvraj Chaulagai, Vice Chairman at Nepal Institute of International Relations, who is also the member of the Central Committee of CPN Maoist Center, states that Nepal was one of the major founder and actor of the NAM movement. One of the major pillars of Nepal's foreign policy for over decades is neutrality. He further adds that due to the lack of long-term policy and absence of the clear vision and unity on the issue of national interest, Nepal's act on the international arena is not so strong. Nepal should overview its own stances and acts on the light of national interest. Gradual erosion on NAM and future relevance. Nepal voted in favor of the non-binding UN resolution on February 23, 2023, denouncing Russia's incursion into Ukraine. The resolution passed by the UN General Assembly was supported by 141 countries out of the 193 UN members. It was unexpected to learn that Nepal supported the resolution calling on Moscow to withdraw its soldiers despite South Asian nations like Bangladesh, India and Pakistan abstaining from the UN vote denouncing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. When India remained neutral, why couldn't we? This is the question. Russian ambassador to Nepal, Alexei Novikov, on September 1, 2023 said, the way Nepal supported confrontational anti-Russian resolution during the UN 11th Emergency Special Session does not contribute neither to relations with Russia nor to the traditional Nepali approach in the international organization. It was in the Annapurna Express. It is believed that the reason behind Nepal's anti-Russian stance and its recent shift in favor of US post its $500 million grant to the Millennium Challenge Corporation MCC, later approved by the Nepali Parliament. According to Dr. Bahadur, there are two procedures followed in the UN voting process: explanation of vote before vote and explanation of vote after vote. And most of the time we follow a silent protocol. It will be simpler for future researchers to use our speech there as a reference. Principally, we are following NAM, but we have not been able to explain convincingly why we take certain decisions. We must keep in mind that our prompt action in an international forum will have a long-term impact on future events. Professor Dahal asserts that Nepal's foreign policy strategy must be compatible with its choice in hedging, balancing, bandwagoning, diversification and adaptation to regional and global power shift. Mr. Chaulagai claims that big powers are always against the non-aligned movement. As Nepal is in sensitive geopolitical landscape, he proposed that we always have to strike a balance between two giant neighbors. In his view, non-aligned movement is still relevant to us as there are escalating tensions between China and India and China and the USA. Mr. Chaulagai criticizes that among the biased alliances like Quad and IPS in the region, Nepal should not break its long-term foreign policy measures of NAM. But yes, we should make several changes to deal with the power nations to exploit the opportunities for the multiple interests of Nepal, as quoted by Chaulagai. Some significant cases. Case number 1. UN Assembly orders Vietnamese forces to leave Cambodia. Nepal voted for the resolution. The UN General Assembly passed a resolution overwhelmingly demanding Vietnam to remove its troops from Cambodia following a 3-day debate. The result was 91 in favor, 21 against and 29 abstentions. The 5 associations of Southeast Asian nations members, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia and the Philippines sponsored the resolution, which did not specifically name Vietnam, according to the New York Times dated November 15, 1979. A clear statement stating that the resolution would have called for ceasefire and withdrawal of all foreign forces and requested Secretary General to report the progress towards implementation within 2 weeks. That can be found in meeting number 2112 of UN. Despite the resolution not mentioning Vietnamese forces by name, it was clear that the foreign forces were intended to be Vietnamese forces. Nepal voted for the resolution. Case number 2. Nepal supported the UN resolution calling for the withdrawal of foreign troops from Afghanistan. Although it likely would not actively participate in any attempts to put the UN resolution which called for the withdrawal of foreign forces from Afghanistan into effect, Nepal backed it. Nepal's response to the situation would ultimately be determined in large part by its geographic location between two powerful nations, China and India, whose approaches to the problem differed greatly. Although it initially backed the UN resolution, Sri Lanka has since shifted to a more reserved and wait-and-see stance. Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Nepal have all denounced the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan with great vehemence. The topic was debated in January 1980 by the Security Council but failed to produce a resolution. Case number 3. Nepal's decision to not vote in favor of the UN resolution against Myanmar. In November 2018, the UN passed a resolution on human rights violations against the Rohingya Muslim who had fled their country to escape the horrors carried out by the junta. Nepal was one of the 26 countries who chose not to vote on the resolution. Despite being a member of the UN Human Rights Council, experts criticizes that Nepal ignored the atrocities committed by the military government in Myanmar. Nepal made this decision possibly considering the sensitivities of the Burmese residents who are of Nepalese descent. In conclusion, despite the divergent opinions among analysts regarding the current significance of the non-aligned movement, I firmly believe that Nepal bears a great deal of duty to skillfully and impartially convey its perspective without fear and favors. Given our delicate geostrategic position, political leadership pressuring diplomats and vice versa to prioritize their personal and ideological pursuits over the interest of the country would have unnecessarily larger political and diplomatic ramifications in the future. An increased emphasis is placed on the 5 NAM principles, which include mutual respects for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty, mutual non-aggression, mutual non-interference in domestic affairs, equality and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. One of the most crucial NAM principles, mutual non-interference in domestic affairs, was and remains in limbo in Nepal's context due to various factors, including the series of blockade Nepal faced from its southern neighbor and the role diplomats played in changing the country's regime. The ideological orientation that our northern neighbor provided to our political cadres, or the imposition of secularism in our constitution by Western nations through our leaders ensuring the right to conversions. These aberrations jeopardize the sovereignty of the nation as well as being the antithesis of the non-aligned movement. In this context, isn't it time to re-examine the NAM principles in light of contemporary global issues like good governance, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law? With this, let me conclude this episode. I will come up with the new episode with a new topic. Thank you very much for watching me. I appreciate. Thank you.